Hi, I'm Othais, and do you hear that? That noise? Can it be? Why yes, it's the Carabina Modelo 1895, a Spanish Mauser carbine. Looks a bit familiar if I'm honest, but let's go ahead and get it over the light box. With an overall length of 37 inches and weighing just 7.4 pounds, this is much handier than the infantry rifle, although it does use the same 7x57mm Mauser cartridge, feeding 5 from a stripper clip into its double-stacked flush magazine. Just a reminder, this show is almost entirely a product of our patrons because we do not monetize well on YouTube, and we do not have an ongoing sponsorship of any kind. This is a donor-funded program, or you can visit our shop and pick up some product to show your love. This episode is part 2 of an ongoing story about the Mauser 1893 action in Spain. In case you missed it, we already spoke about the lead up to adoption and the first few years of service for the long rifle of the Mauser 1893 family. Today we're going to rewind just a bit and cover the carbine versions of said long arm before going into a little extra history on the ultimate fate of the 1893 in Spain. Also, I have to warn you all, this episode is another one of those that is built on, well, more of a loamy surface than a solid one. Despite being one of the most common milsurp rifles in the market, Spanish Mauser history has been sparsely documented. Working from what sources I have been able to actually lay hands on, I've tried to string together the most coherent version of the history that we can reasonably assume at this point. However, this is a topic that will eventually require more direct hands-on research in Spain before it can be cleared up. So, be warned. Let's go ahead and start our carbines at the beginning with that contract with Ludwig Olson from last episode. The initial call was for only 5,000 carbines. These would have been the old model 1892 in the original writing. Thanks to trials with the Spanish Navy, 400 of these guns were assembled outside of the actual contract. The barrel length, straight with stock, flush muzzle cap with tall sight protectors, they should all seem pretty familiar. Outside of the 1892 internals and the lack of a short handguard, this really appears to be the same as an Argentine 1891 carbine. From our last episode, we know that the 1892 model would not last. Both the rifle and carbine versions would be swapped over to the new 1893 pattern. And this was the end result, actually quite different from the 1892 since it had a single saddle ring and sported a handguard. Overall length was now only 37 inches, making it a handy accessory for cavalry use. Now curiously, despite being contracted for, paid for, accepted, and then even issued to troops, the Spanish government had not actually approved the 1893 carbine pattern. It's likely these purchases were rushed on through, despite minor concerns, particularly about the fittings, because of colonial upheaval. Recall, last time, they were involved in a fight in the Rif right away. It's better to fix a few bits and bobs later on and have the guns right now. Eventually, however, they would get around to improving the design, particularly once they had begun limited production at Oviedo. It was time to really seal the pattern. The end result was this, adopted by Royal Order May 7th, 1896, but backdated so that this would be the Modelo 1895, nearly identical to the 1893, but there are a few slight differences. The original carbine had a single saddle ring, but wider issue could be achieved with a side sling setup added as well, so a swivel was placed on the barrel band and a sort of large staple to the stock. At first it seems the saddle ring stuck around, but they would eventually be phased out. I'm unsure of exactly what date. The Oviedo bolt handle had a gentler curve, and the rear sight, like the rifle, was somewhat different, likely easier to manufacture. So if your gun was made outside of Spain, it started life as an 1893 pattern carbine. If it was made at Oviedo, then it was born as an 1895. However, over the years, it seems many 1893s were either deliberately converted to 1895s or just managed to inherit 1895 parts along the way. My gun here is likely an example of the latter. So let's go ahead and take a look because I've got a bit of a mix master. All right, gang, we have a much shorter gun. Look at this. Now, flush. Nose cap, no provision for a bayonet lug, and strong sight protectors. Roll on down, we actually have a half-length handguard as small as it is, and then full stock on the underside, mid-position band. The rear sight here, let's go ahead and focus on that. This little ladder sight is actually of the Oviedo type, which means it was probably updated at some point for the Spitzer cartridge or otherwise repaired, because this is a Lova Mauser. So it would have originally had the flatter, sleeker looking button instead of this chunky, easy to make one. Now, you notice it's graduated only up to 1400 meters because we were expected to lose some muzzle velocity with that short barrel. Now, as I come on down, our crest is a little worn, and we have a turned down bolt handle. Being of the early Lova pattern, this is actually pretty sharp in the corners, and otherwise we've got a pretty standard 1893. Nothing in the action has changed, nothing in the safety has changed. Really, the only other differences other than the length, because the butt plate, everything else is similar. The only difference is that originally, this gun would have just had one of these. That, of course, being a saddle ring, like you'd expect to find on, say, a Winchester. This is a very American West style of saddle ring, but the reason it exists is because the cavalry would have worn this gun with a very large, wide sash over one shoulder, and this would have hooked it to them right about at the hip line. That meant it was good for carrying on foot or on horseback and got it to the shoulder very quickly. Now, over time, this proved to be a very limited use, and so they went ahead and added extra features, which would be a standard side sling swivel on the barrel band. Originally, this would not have been on this particular gun, and all the way at the end, a fixed side swivel in the form of a giant staple. I'm not even sure how that's anchored in there. I guess if anybody has one that's already been damaged or come out, send me a photo. It's kind of wild. Looks like it was just hammered on in. Having looked around, it's likely exceedingly rare to encounter a pure Spanish 1893 these days. However, I don't think these sling swivels will change much about Mae's experience as she demonstrates this little beauty for us. I love carbines. Now, service life for the 1893 and 1895 carbines mirrored the 1893 long rifle we talked about last time. We carried the history through the Spanish-American War, but not any further, which really was just a way to help split the information up into digestible bites. We still have a lot of ground to cover. The 1893 long rifle, carbine, and 1895 carbines would serve well beyond 1898. First up was the Boxer Rebellion, a conflict that we seem to reference frequently as just about every nation showed up to try out their new smokeless rifles on the Qing dynasty. In 1909, the Spanish would enter the Second Melian Campaign, another Moroccan conflict around, well, Melilla. You'll never guess who was involved. The Riffians, of course. This time they had attacked Spanish miners, prompting a punitive campaign. This was followed in 1911 by another campaign in, you'll never guess this, it was Morocco. Again, the Riffians. I'm detecting a pattern here. This time, Muhammad al-Maziane had called for a jihad against the Spanish in the Eastern Rif. This proved especially bloody, with 500 Spanish dead and 1,900 wounded, before al-Maziane was killed in January of 1912. Now, despite spending most of their time attempting to hold on to a nearby colonial stake against a largely unsupported and poorly equipped force, Spain wasn't happy to simply fall behind in terms of military technology on the world stage. Over the years, they invested the usual amount into improvements that we later see come to play a huge role in World War I. So machine guns, improved artillery, trucks and tractors on occasion, especially aviation, and so on and so forth. These changes mean diversifying your soldiers. No longer is it just infantry and cavalry. There's a need for sort of universal short rifle, and curiously, this had been suggested all the way back at the beginning. Mauser Obendorf had offered up a number 2 carbine, one that Spain had decided against. This was a shortened rifle with a bayonet lug. Curiously, despite not being adopted, 40 were made experimentally by Oviedo for trials. Finding them wanting, they were issued to observation balloons for a time. It does appear, however, that this became the pattern for the Mexican 1895 carbine, which Oviedo did export in the latter 1890s. From here, there are some gaps, but it appears that Spain kept going back to this idea of an artillery and engineer's carbine with a bayonet lug, and just never quite took the plunge. Various prototypes and bayonets appear and disappear, but by 1913, they were apparently taking it seriously again. A Musketoon was developed, and I'm sadly lacking an image of it. However, it apparently looked quite a bit like this, the gun that would appear 3 years later, the Modelo 1916. Lightbox. With an overall length of 41.5 inches and weighing in at 8.4 pounds, this is actually getting into short rifle territory more so than a carbine, hence the name Musketoon. Now, of course, it still uses 7x57mm Mauser cartridges, 5 of them stripper clip, staggered flush magazine, you get the idea. Now, before I get too deep into this guy, I should point out that 1913 was something of a banner year. Engineers at Oviedo were taking a hard look at their rifles and carbines and wanted to make some changes, many of which had actually been studied over previous years. But first and foremost, Spain introduced a Spitzer bulleted version of the 7x57 cartridge. Pointier and lighter with an aerodynamic boat tail, this was an even faster, flatter shooting cartridge, and so would require some changes to the rifles. Now, these guns were new made for that purpose, so let me get out the old guy for a second, because this is where I get confused. Now, they probably did some changes to the chambering. I haven't been able to find any notes about them. They had to have done changes to the rear sight, and this is what boggles my mind, and it's where I say there's a lot of room for research on Spanish Mausers. I've done my best. So this one is a 1915 production gun. It should have had an original updated Spitzer rear sight on it, and I've compared it to, let's say, Spanish-American War captured 1893s. Now, I haven't been able to do it in person, but overlaying images, that sort of thing. I cannot pick up on what the heck they changed. The graduations look exactly the same to me, but that doesn't sound right either. I would really like to know if anybody has found research material on this front, because to my eye, I cannot spot what the heck was made different about the rear sight. I do, however, know more about the other change in 1913, which was the addition of a new style of bayonet. Adopted in March, this Toledo-made blade was almost 16 inches in length and was originally going to replace the standard 1893 model of infantry rifle bayonet. It's likely that this new bayonet was an offshoot of the aforementioned research on an artillery carbine. Well, also in 1913, the War Material Commission approved the construction of 30 trials carbines of a new type. These had roughly 30-inch barrels, took the new 1913 bayonet, and interestingly had a German Longevizier-styled rear sight. The pattern actually seems to be very early, as it looks similar to those in the German trials all the way back from 1895. While the carbines were being tested, a number of other possible considerations emerged. Changes to the lock, safety, extractor, and other parts were discussed. The problem, of course, was while you could definitely, make some improvements to the Spanish Mauser, would it really be worth the expense when the rifles are already kind of holding their own quite well? In the end, just a few extras were introduced for the new short rifles, and I happen to have one of those short rifles here, so let's take a look at what all was done. Alright, we've got a short rifle. So, at the rear, we're still looking at straight wrist stock, the full tang butt plate metal, Mauser action turn down bolt handle. For anyone curious, this is the rounder looking Oviedo style of turn down bolt handle. And as I come forward, we'll skip our fancy sight for a second, go to our half hand guard, mid position barrel band, through a stock all the way up to this bayonet lug, and then there's our spring clip release. Actually, I should have shown you that on the previous rifle. Same idea, you push here in order to get that guy off. Clearing rod, and then we have our front sight with a pinned over protector. This actually appears to be a copy of a design from Ludwig Olson that was available as far back as I could tell. It was on the Brazilian 1894 carbine at first. So this is a known version of how to do a protected front sight. It's a regular front sight block, but they've wrapped around this protector and pinned on through. And in this case, it's gotten a little loose, but notice the front sight itself is fine. The rear sight bed is clearly marked from 300 to 1,900 meters. And in this case, it's a Lange Visier style, the German roller coaster sight. Although radically simplified and honestly just a little bit, I'm gonna say janky. Like, if I roll this guy up, it's very not smooth. It's actually quite sharp feeling. And then once you're in position, you got at least 50 meters of waggle in there. That's, I've never seen one any better than this either. It's actually kind of a weird decision, if I'm honest. And it looks like, as far as I've been able to tell, this is most comparable to a much earlier pattern of the Lange Visier, one that was available, again, in the mid-1890s on experimental rifles. It's pretty bizarre. Now, for those of you who cursed me for struggling with the floor plate in the last episode, you'll be happy to see this improved pattern, which is available in the early 1916s, and then appears to have disappeared, going back to the old rifle pattern. I guess it was easier to make. But this has a hinged magazine floor plate release button right here inside the trigger guard, which I can just depress all the way down, and then that releases it into a hinged position fixed with a pin so that this cannot be lost. This is actually, to me, a marked improvement, and it's much more reminiscent of, say, a Japanese Arisaka. The two final improvements on this gun can be seen from the left side. One, we have a thumb cut here to make it easier to feed from a strip or clip, so crunk. And two, there's a gas relief hole cut on the left side of the receiver. So if you were to have a ruptured case of some sort, then you're going to blow most of the failed gas out of this left side port away from the shooter before it gets on down through the action. This proved to be of no detriment to accuracy or the reliability of the rifle, and yet was a very expedient way to add a strong safety measure for bad ammunition. Now, the problem with this modification in particular, and also a little bit this one, is I'm unsure of exactly when they were supposed to have been made. Most sources claim that it was introduced with the adoption of the 1916, and to date I have not seen a 1916 pattern carbine or short rifle Musketoon that does not have this gas hole. So that's strongly likely. However, during my reading, I also saw that this was part of a program of upgrades that they wanted to do to the guns overall in the early 1930s. So that's a fairly wide spread, and I would have expected to encounter at least a couple 1916s without this feature if that were true, but it's something to keep in mind because, again, this episode is still one of our looser ones in terms of having what I would call primary source research. Ultimately, this package would be officially adopted in November of 1916 as the Musketoon 1916, and despite being the product of a search for an engineer's and artillery carbine, the 1916 actually was assigned primarily to cavalry. Watching the Great War play out next door, Spain had realized what many other nations had by then, that your saber wasn't much use when you were on foot, and in the new style of warfare, cavalry were often dismounted. Now, the old 1895 carbine did remain in production for some time, as it was smaller and handier for specialty units who were not expected to use a bayonet. And I've seen it listed for cadets and the gendarmerie specifically. All right, I know what y'all want. You want to see Mae try this out. Now, generally we're a World War I show, but Spain managed to stay out of that particular fight. And while this could have been a very smart short rifle for such a conflict, especially in the trenches, the 1916 wouldn't see a war until 1921, and you'll never guess where. The Rif, of course. Following the Treaty of Fez, Spanish ambitions in the Rif were checked by the locals. As the conflict evolved, the Spanish forces became overextended and rapidly collapsed. This would make for years of conflict and the involvement of the French, before both countries managed to establish effective control of the region. While I'm unsure of the exact reason why, sometime just after that Rif War, Oviedo made another change to this carbine, specifically to the rear sight. Apparently, this little longa wasn't cutting it, and a much simpler tangent rear sight was now fitted. I actually happen to have a gun like that here. Oh, it doesn't get any fanfare though, because it's still a Musketoon 1916. It really is just a different rear sight, so let's check it out. Now, at a glance, this is the same short rifle. The only differences are, as far as I can tell, a handful of these have definitely come to my eye that have an improved lower barrel band release spring with some texture on it. Not sure if that's original to this gun or why, but I could find no notes about it. But two, it has the improved rear sight. Like our last sight, this one is marked from 300 meters to 1,900, although on the top we have a marking for 2,000, so we can read that as well. Now, this is a standard tangent rear leaf, so I just push the button, slide the bar, and set up my marking. In this case, you usually should be able to push these and ride them, and I can, but that is beating up my finger. It's a little sticky. I tend to prefer to pinch lift and set back down on this particular design. Now, this particular sight I do happen to know is known as the Type C, and I only found that out from a description in a circa 1930 manual from Oviedo. I assume that the previous sight would have been the B, and the original rifle sight would have been the A, but I can't know that for sure without more resources. Thank you, Henry, for making that loan. You're my buddy. Now, I don't have access to a ton of survey data, but I'm assured both rear sight styles were produced for a number of years, perhaps using up old stocks of the parts, or maybe there was a special use case that I'm unaware of. Oviedo does not seem to have differentiated between the guns, so I only have a rough estimate of production available, which includes both designs. Apparently, just shy of 300,000 Musketoon in total were produced up to 1936, and then things get a bit confusing. However, the core issue traces back to 1931. This is the old Oviedo crest, which displays a Spanish crown, which represents Alfonso XIII, who had been monarch for actually the entire service life of the Mauser 1893. In 1931, however, he was deposed, largely for having been supportive of Dictator de Rivera. That is a whole other story of Spanish politics, but the long and short of it is Spain lost its king, and the rifles lost their crowns, sort of. I see a lot of rifles manufactured in 1931 that have no markings whatsoever above the text and date. By 1932, a new mural crown has appeared, representative of the government and not the monarch. This pattern would carry on for just a few years until 1936, which is when the Spanish Civil War began. In brief, Spanish politics had formed into two major coalitions, the Nationalists versus the Republicans, with the former launching a coup against the incumbent latter. Nationalist successes led to the occupation of the Oviedo factory, so the Republicans had to establish new production of their own rifles. They would, of course, produce more of the universally useful Musketoon 1916, although with the tangent leaf. Two smaller factories, Industries de Guerra de Catalunya and Subsecretaria de Armamentos, would manage to crank out some examples. However, production estimates vary, and it's commonly believed they were prone to catastrophic failure at times. Alright, we are well beyond our usual era, but I only have a bit more to say, and we'll have the current understanding of Spanish Mausers sorted pretty well. Thanks to German support during the Spanish Civil War, the 7.92 Mauser cartridge would become more common in inventory, and the move to a Gewehr 98 pattern of Mauser would begin. The previous model 1916 would be officially replaced with the Modelo 1943 Musketoon. The long rifle was now all but abandoned for frontline use. Some limited conversions of the old 93 actions to the new German cartridge would be carried out, but it doesn't appear to have gone very far. Instead, the old guns stayed in 7mm until the 1950s and early 1960s, when large stocks were converted into 7.62 CETME. The attempt was to standardize with the new Spanish rifle, but this has caused confusion. Without opening a whole can of worms, Spain adopted a reduced charge 7.62 NATO cartridge. This was used with their Modelo B CETME. During those years, these Mausers were converted and were strong enough to handle the new cartridge. However, Spain eventually moved to full power NATO, still probably not too hard on the old Mauser action. 7mm is a strong cartridge. However, once these guns were then sold as surplus and entered the US collector's market, they tend to get fed .308 Winchester, which is still hotter by another 4,000 PSI or so. There are endless internet arguments about whether or not this is safe to do, and honestly, I don't have the 50 samples and hundreds of test cartridges and pressure testing gear and everything that I would really need to know the answer on this, and I don't know of anybody that's run it all down. It's just all hearsay. I will say, however, if the Spanish bothered to adjust the sights, I don't know if they did, you'll get better performance keeping the original load data for 7.62 CETME, or maybe NATO. Returning to our history lesson, most of these guns were destined for the Guardia Civil, and so many bear their crossed fascine crest, although not all, so please do be careful to check the chambering on any used Spanish Mauser you may encounter. And finally, the last iteration of the 1893 would be this, the Fusil Reformado 7, which used a CETME C bayonet and a new rear sight in order to better serve as a transitional carbine and training weapon. Notably, being a replacement for the CETME C, these likely were meant to shoot the actual NATO cartridge, but again, not necessarily sighted for or rated for .308 Winchester. Whew, okay, finally obsoleted. Spanish Mausers would be sold surplus into the collector's market, where they can be found in widely varying condition, usually with mismatched parts, and for now, they're quite affordable. By the way, for his part in making such a lovely rifle for Spain, Paul Mauser was awarded the Spanish Military Merit Order, a very high honor for excellence. Alright, with all of our ducks in a row, let's talk to Mae about what it's like to pop them over with the Spanish carbines. Alright gang, once more we've made room for Mae, and we don't need a lot of space for this carbine.
No we don't.
The Spanish 1895. And before I go any further, bear with us if you hear any rumbling.
Yeah.
We've spent 3 days avoiding a thunderstorm that will not stop, so...
Nope, and it's been just pretty much storming for the past 3 weeks,
yeah,
so...
It's film now or no episodes.
We just live in soup.
Alright, last time we talked about the long rifle. This time, with the ominous sounds behind us, we can now talk about the carbine.
It's true, we can.
Ergonomically, what's going on here?
Effectively, what I think I'm looking at, and show like all of it to the camera. Boy, I don't have to go far with that one. We are looking at what is essentially the long rifle cut down with different front and rear sights, and then extra little swing swivel doodads going on here. But otherwise...
Hey, turn down bolt.
I was getting to that.
Okay.
Yeah, same action, but turn down bolt. Nothing else seems different,
No.
other than obviously weight and length.
Right. How's that weight and length?
I mean, actually much improved. This is demonstrably easier for me to handle and run and gun with, even if I wanted to.
Where's the balance point at?
Balance point actually is much further back. It's right under the mag well this time.
Right on the magazine. That's where we want it.
To be fair, just in front of the trigger, yeah, not too bad. But yeah, she's pretty handy in this state.
Okay, so with all this reduction in size, first of all, you've lost somewhere around 500 meters.
Yeah.
So you're no longer accurate to 2,000 meters. Are you sure you're going to be able to survive?
Dang. I mean, I might be able to survive. It's possible. I mean, I guess the range we're shooting at, we're definitely going to be able to survive.
We never shoot beyond 150 down here, although we are going to have access to a 700 soon.
Yeah, that's
So,
kind of exciting.
again-
And currently, if anyone's seen any video of it, it does kind of look trench-esque. So, especially with all this rain, it's probably great.
Yeah. All right, so it's lighter
Yep.
It's handier.
Yep.
Would you rather carry this around than the long rifle?
Oh, well, hands down. Are you kidding me? Plus, it's got this turn-down bolt, so I can throw this guy up against my back and not worry about snagging anything with it. Perfect.
Did the turn-down bolt hurt the operation of the gun at all?
No, if anything, with my experience, as I've gotten used to all the different styles of bolts, turn-down bolts really seem to be great just in terms of dropping your hand right there with the trigger. They really are quite perfect for that. And this one, look where it's at. It's just right there in front of the trigger. So dropping the bolt, you kind of slip back into it. It's quite nice.
Also, for the nature of our filming, we have Mae drop the gun.
You're never gonna, it's gonna be always startling a little bit.
We always have Mae drop the gun. That's in order to check the casings to slow down the rate of fire so we can make sure that there was a bullet hole for each shot so we don't have squibs. And it's also to give the camera something to look at a better angle because we can't always get up over.
Right.
Now, generally you'd be running it from the shoulder and never taking it off your shoulder. So that turn down bolt, when you actually cycle it from the shoulder, speeds you up a lot better.
Yeah.
Dramatic effect.
Sure, I know, right?
So, you would prefer this over the straight?
I would, absolutely, yeah.
There's been some that you haven't preferred because they were a little hard to get up under. How's it?
This one actually has just enough room that I can easily slide into. And you notice it doesn't just stay rigid. It actually, I can't show this to the camera, but like, it's very easy to give myself just a little bit of wiggle out of place. That way it's not completely where it's at before. It's maybe 2-3 millimeters that it moves, but that's just enough that it's perfect. I can get an easy hand under there, no problem. Now, someone with bigger hands, I don't know. How about you? How are you doing for getting under that?
I've had no problems with it, and I think it sticks out enough that if I had a stuck case and needed to whack it, it's not so tucked up in. It's not like a half cut that's folded down or anything like that with a relief cut. I get worried when I see the relief cut in the stock. Because
it makes you think that that's something that it was a serious problem and they did require it.
Well, no, it just means that they made it so flush that to get your finger in there, they had to make a relief cut on the stock. But which is fine for your finger, but then if you need to bash it open in a desperate bid to get some blown out, because that's the thing is, think about ammo failures in a mass war, right? We really want to plan for bad ammo because that's what happened in World War I. And so sometimes you got to be able to take it to the ground, and being able to do that.
That one right there, I feel like is just enough room that you'd be able to pop her open pretty hard.
Okay.
So perfect.
So what's it like shooting this compared to the long rifle?
So yeah, coming from the long rifle, obviously lost the weight, lost the length. So those are obvious big differences. Sights, so there is a massive difference, especially with the front sight. The rear sight, it still seems just as fine for the U-notch back here. But the front sight, we've got a little tiny notch in between two massive wings. And Othais and I were playing with this a little bit before we actually got on camera, but I can't really see somebody accidentally mistaking one of these two massive protective wings on the outside for the front sight. Maybe if you're in a hurry.
Yeah, they're kind of close in terms of vertical plane, but they're really far spread and they're very thick and chunky.
And you definitely can't do the left one. You have to rotate the gun over in order to get the left side, but the right side, maybe. If you're in a hurry.
Yeah.
It's possible, but otherwise, still pretty easy read, and it would just take a lot for me to get that confused.
Now you said U-notch. Is that actually a U-notch or a V-notch?
No, it looks like a U-notch to me.
Let me double check.
It's very soft.
Are we going to learn a thing live?
No. Maybe it's V-notch.
It's definitely a V on the rifle. The rifle looks like a V.
Is that a V or is that a U? It's just really soft. The problem is that it's a soft V.
It could also just be worn the crap out. I think it's supposed to be a V, and it's worn out quite nicely over the years.
Okay, then yeah, there we go.
To give you the tell, the ladder sights is a V, so they probably would have preserved both.
Yeah, okay, yeah. You're not wrong there. I didn't even think about that. That's a good good point to point out. Yeah, I guess that just got soft.
This one, the crest is worn off. The sights are worn out. This one actually had some sticking when you were working with it, didn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately it did. I wasn't super happy about that because I was expecting this to kind of remind me of the Serbian or maybe like the Caballería Dec or something like that and just be amazing with its feel. But then I had the sticking with the bolt and I was just like, oh, come on. Everything about you screams you should be perfect.
Yeah, I'd have to take a look into the gun a little bit deeper. Don't forget, we use used rifles on here. So what I'm doing is I'm checking out the feed lips and stuff.
I see if there's any sort of like...
There's probably some sort of dimensional issue of given the wear on this gun. And so it was just snagging every once in a while on a fed cartridge.
When the cartridges fed perfect, it felt amazing.
Yeah, I don't believe this one has a matched bolt either. No, so the bolt was replaced at some point.
Okay, so maybe there's an issue there with that.
Although it is a foreign make bolt. You can tell by how sharp the angle is on it. So the Oviedo made turn down bolts have a very round, sort of soft look to them.
Okay.
And the foreign made ones tend to be a very sharp turn by comparison, and they have firmer shoulders. So this was a Lova made gun. It's a Lova made bolt. It just doesn't look like a matched serial number for some reason. It must have gotten swapped. But yeah, that's one way to tell them apart.
Cool, good to know.
Now, of course, most of them end up like this, where they have all the features because they just got turned into generic mush.
Right, and weirdly, normally I would be upset about no semi-pistol grip, by the way. Where this loop ends up right here, this with lanyard ring, I kind of rested my hand a little bit against that in order to kind of pretend like it was a semi-pistol grip almost. It was kind of perfect.
Yeah, now that is a saddle ring, by the way, and the way this works, I think I said it earlier in the episode, but you'd have this big sash that would go around and hang right on your right hip.
Sash.
And then that would click to it, just click. And then that way the carbine could hang when you're riding, or if you're walking, it would hang.
Neat.
And it was short enough that it didn't, drag on the ground, and then you could just pull it up and use it from the saddle and let it fall, unless you were going to put it into a scabbard or something at some other point. But basically, in the heat of the moment, it's just sort of sashed around you. This goes back a long way. You see saddle rings, pre-Civil War. So actually, Civil War is a good time to find a lot of photos of people wearing like the saddle ring sash, like all the cavalry. They tend to have those big wide sashes.
And then shooting-wise, the only other difference really between this and the long rifle I did not mention was recoil. Obviously, we're going to get an increase in recoil there. There was a significant amount of it, though.
Yeah. You're getting a lot more climb.
Yep.
With the 7mm Mauser cartridge, did you feel like it was unmanageable, though?
No, the thing is, it's such a beautiful cartridge. I think if it had been more than that, yeah, it would have been a bit much. It had kind of felt like shooting closer to 8mm Lebel or something like that. But it would have been more punchier. But no, it wasn't quite there. I
think a gun this short, 8mm Mauser, starts to get a little aggressive.
Yeah.
8mm Lebel is painful.
Yeah. Remember the Berthiers.
The 7x57, though, definitely seems to work okay for a carbine.
Yes.
I wouldn't say it's ideal. I think getting on into the friendlier 6.5s is nicer for carbine length. But if I have to have a full power rifle cartridge coming out of a short barrel, I tend to like 7mm for that job. It works pretty well.
I mean, if this had been slightly, maybe a touch bit longer, it would have been better.
Some sort of
right.
short rifle.
I did shoot another gun.
Here, let me hand you that.
Sure.
I'll take the carbine and set it aside because now we're on to... Oh, actually, no.
Why? Longer
We're skipping. Hold on. Wait. You can't just run away with that.
Why not?
Would you take this into World War I?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, yeah.
I can't see myself not because effectively we've got an improved version of the long rifle here.
You have no bayonet, though.
Yeah, that's true. I guess I'll have to knife them with my hands.
Does that make you nervous?
I mean, I guess I wouldn't have an access with it as a tool. That is, unfortunately, not very useful. I think they all should come with them, but I guess it just depends on your situation for if you actually find it a critical thing or not.
In the modern context, and especially by World War II, you really see people saying, we don't need to prioritize bayonets. Bayonets are not a function of a modern military force.
And also, we've lost the pikeness that came with the long infantry.
Yeah, but that was an anti-cavalry concern, having that pike length, and the machine gun really settled cavalry.
Right.
So it gets interesting. You no longer need it to be a pike. So it's okay that it's short. But then, the reason the gun you're holding there was developed is because, as much as they wanted one for engineers and artillery, like we talked about in the episode, what finally made them seem to get off their butts was the fact that everyone else realized their cavalry no longer needed swords. They needed bayonets because the bayonet was still useful in World War I.
I mean, I could see the bayonet being more useful than the sword.
Right, the sword had become useless. The bayonet was still useful. So you end up with cavalry fitting, like Sweden, they did the 94-14 that we shot.
Right.
Where they went back and had a gun that looked a lot like this one. And they shoved a bayonet lug on it. And you see it with the Argentinians with their 1909, where they're like, we better put a bayonet back on that.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting that this actually didn't get a bayonet just shoved on it.
Because you easily could swap it out.
Oh yeah, you could put it on a nose cap and then like hang a doodad, but the problem is it would stick really far down.
That's a technical term we use here.
Doodad. The lug.
Yeah.
So You could have, but they just never did. They stayed in their cavalry configuration and then ended up being assigned to not cavalry. So then you have this, which was adopted...
1916.
Well,
not when it was adopted.
Research for the artillery and engineers, but then adopted for the cavalry. Okay.
Sure.
So what have you got there?
Well, it effectively, just appearances alone, looks to be a short rifle, essentially somewhere between the 1895 carbine and the 93 long rifle. Okay, sure. Why the heck is there a longer vizier sight on
Because
this
is the Chibi Gewehr 98.
That's adorable, really?
I mean, if you look at it, it looks like it's just a small ring Mauser with a smaller longer vizier.
Yep.
That's simplified.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's just not what I was expecting. Like, I guess, like, I'm looking at all of these carbines that we've handled before. I'm like, when did they have longer viziers on them? That's just so weird to me. It doesn't fit.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, we've got that, and then we definitely have a new front sight on here. These wings seem like they'll be extra protective of that front sight, but dang, they are curved and thin, and they kind of seem like it'd be something that you might dangerously mistake for the front sight itself.
Yeah, when you actually get behind it, they're curved enough to tell you something's up, but...
I think if you went down to up, it's
like if
possible.
you brought up your front sight?
Yeah, I think if you brought it up, I think you could possibly mistake one for the front sight itself, but obviously if you went past a certain point, you'd be like, oh no, that's curved, obviously not the front sight.
Mae did not have any problems with this. We had a conversation.
Yeah, it seems like it's possible. I personally didn't experience it, but it still seems like it's something that could happen.
For me, I immediately misread one of them when I picked it up. And then it took me a second to reorient myself because I went, no, that's crooked. That can't be right. And so my eye wanted to grab one, but I immediately knew something was wrong. However, that's still a delay. I don't prefer front sight protectors that can be mistaken for front sights. And I especially don't prefer them when they're that close to the front sight because this comes in real tight. But
oh yeah, this comes in super tight. It's not just that, but also like it makes the front sight area kind of busy.
Yeah, it's confusing looking in a way.
Yeah, I don't care for that. And then it seems like we still have, is this the same bayonet lug that was on the 93?
Yeah, it's the same rifle lug. So it's just been transposed over. Seems to be working fine. Sure. Again, we had some problems. Like we were concerned about how weak they might be. I doubt in practice it was that big of a concern.
Yeah.
How many times are you really bayoneting?
Fair. And then, we've still got a turn down bolt action Mauser. It looks like we have a nice little gas port relief over here, which is kind of a good idea. I can't see that being a bad thing. I don't see it taking away from the gun. Otherwise, yeah,
loading should have been a little simpler.
A little simpler. How so?
It has a thumb cut in the left side.
Oh shoot! I totally forgot about that. Yeah, so you can just go. Yeah, I love it. I love when you just go.
Yeah.
That's the sound that it makes when you do it. It goes,
I thought it went.
I mean, yeah, that's just a machine gun. But I mean, if you want to make it into a machine gun, that's fine.
You have the different turn down handle too. You now have the rounder one.
Oh,
Does it make any difference?
There definitely is a roundedness to it. Let's see. Is this closer to the stock? It's actually kind of weird.
Here you go.
Just want to look at them for a second.
Hold on. Now this is going to get awkward territory. All right. Yeah. I'll hold these as best I can on a frame, and you try both.
I'm just seeing. I think I like the angled one better. I think it's sticking it out better. Like I think because this one turns and comes in a little bit.
It keeps on curving in.
Yes, I don't think I prefer that as much because now my pinky is actually harder to get up underneath it. Whereas
it looks like
the 95.
That looks like it's a little higher on the stock too.
It is higher up on the stock, just by a little bit. Well, I mean, how am I supposed to?
Camera.
Oh, I'm showing you guys. I don't know. You tell me.
This
I can't see it.
comes a little bit lower down on the stock than this.
Okay, thank you. But in general, I don't think I like the curvature to it. I don't think it adds anything to it. I think it actually is better when it's at the angle.
Okay, so hold on. Let's see if we can fix this problem. All right, here you go.
I'm going to put that on your pants. It lives there now.
My lap.
Lap, whatever. Pants. I was just confirming he's wearing pants. You're welcome. Okay. Oh, yeah, that's night and day difference. Also, it's possible that stock is slightly fatter?
No, this is pretty tight.
Really? Okay. No, I mean, like, it feels like the stock possibly
it might be
fatter.
wider body.
Yeah, I think it's wider body because this feels like it's sticking out more. That's definitely sticking out more, so I think this stock is a little bit thinner, which is actually saying a lot considering that turn-down bolt I thought was closer.
This is almost uncomfortable to use now.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, it was just barely uncomfortable. Here, let me... Oh, no, that's horrible. Yeah, I think that stock is slightly, ever so slightly fatter. But yeah, no, this is the angle bolt is much easier to get control under. And if I had a stuck case, I definitely feel like I could just whack the heck out of that to get it to rotate.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, so what's it like actually shooting?
Actually swap these guys?
Yeah, okay, we're swapping. Just
On
open up your palm.
It's on his pants again.
Why do you're making it sound weird.
Because you made a point to make us point out that it was weird before, so I said it again.
Compared to this carbine, what's it like shooting that short rifle?
So I expected recoil to be different, and it definitely was a little bit, but it's kind of hard to tell from the camera when I review the footage. And actually shooting it the day, I remember thinking, I can't really feel too much of a difference, but it makes sense that they would be pretty close to each other. I think technically that one had more.
The length difference is really just a few inches. If you hold them up to each other, this one ends, the original 1895 carbine ends
just past
right where the front barrel band is on the other one. So it's whatever's beyond that front barrel band is what they added to the barrel.
So that's why I'm like, that one probably had slightly more. It's just, it's hard. It was hard to perceive it on range. It's hard for me to really tell from the video because of the angle difference.
Right.
So I guess that was pretty much it. Triggers are pretty much the same. The sights are really the only other big difference on this.
How are those doing?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's that front sight, man. It really is so busy. I thought the rear sight, the Longa Vizier, was going to be crazy, like, and make it look bizarre. But no, it's the front sight on this one that really kind of throws you off. At
the lowest setting, does the Longa Vizier really seem all that different from the previous sight?
Not especially. If anything, it seems it's a little busier in that it's got these racetrack rails, effectively, because that's what they are, and they stick up a little bit. But you kind of just see that more. For me, I kind of see that more as like a runway to look down.
Right.
I don't really get it confused with the sight picture that I'm looking at.
To my eye, it's a much flatter Longa Vizier than the one that's on the Cavalry 98.
Yes,
this is not interrupting your
is.
sight picture, is it?
No, it definitely is not.
Okay. And then we don't shoot long range, but if your choice is between using the ladder, so the flip-up ladder, or dialing out that Longa Vizier.
I'd rather dial out the Longa Vizier.
Okay.
Like, I feel like that would be much easier. Also, less prone to damage because it's not going to be sticking up quite like that. And it's also going to be tighter on the rifle. So if it does get whacked, I feel like this is just going to have a stronger chance of surviving.
Okay, that's fair. The only advantage I see to the ladder is because this is not... there's no tangent aspect to this ladder. If you were using this at long range and you suddenly had to switch to short range, like somebody came through a bush, just flop it down.
Exactly.
That you have to walk it all the way back.
Yeah, and I want to say those buttons, like, it's not the smoothest Longa Vizier.
No,
like,
fighting that all the way back to your zero position.
So yeah, you're not wrong for rapidly having to change my distance. Much easier, but in general long range use, this one works better.
Now, we did not shoot it, but we do have our buddy Henry's 1916. Hi, Henry.
Yeah, thank you.
And then actually, I do need to say thank you from our previous episode.
Am I allowed to say his name?
Yeah, Michael.
Michael? Yeah, okay. I just didn't know if I was allowed to say names.
Yeah, Michael was the one that lent us the photos of the 1891.
Yes, thank you, Michael.
With the funky bolt face. So thank you both boys for
Appreciate
helping out.
it. Yeah, both of y'all.
So how do you feel about those sights?
I mean, these are much more universally, I think they're universally better. Also, is that front sight different? Yeah, they've improved the front sight. The front, is this original actually? I don't know. Yeah.
What's going on?
They're not quite as tucked in, so on the previous one, it just kind of was like the Batman signal practically,
right,
so it was just like wrapped in, like barely touching it. It was quite like that, whereas this one, they've opened them up a little bit more, so I think it would be much harder to...
might not be as beat up as this one.
That's possible.
Or they've been stretched out.
Also, they don't look as thin. They're slightly chunkier, I think. Ever so slightly.
Oh, no, it's a different design.
Yeah, it's totally different. So it's great. I think the front sight's definitely improved on that. The rear sight, overall is better. This pairing is actually pretty tight. Yeah, I can see myself. Yeah, I like that. That's pretty good.
Now, the one disadvantage of those is generally by the time you get into the tangent rear sight, you no longer have the floor plate release button. So you don't get to just hit a button and have fancy spaghetti snake come out.
I do like the snake in a can deal with that one.
Yeah, I'm going to fill it with like peanuts.
For who?
Because you find the snake, you're supposed to get a bucket of peanuts, and then a snake comes out, and then what I thought is you're supposed to
You just put that on crooked.
It's crooked.
Yeah.
It's fine. I just thought put peanuts in here because they'd never expect it.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Just for the reference.
Okay.
Look, it's my humor.
Okay. It's bad, but yeah.
So out of these
yours.
two, which would you choose?
Between the two of them?
Yeah.
Well, if I'm assuming that this one shoots, like if it's shooting is
same
equal,
thing other than the sights.
I'd shoot this one. I'd take this one. Better sights
Now
overall.
that did not exist by the time of the war, as far as I
Well,
understand.
then why do you break my heart?
That came a little later.
You break my heart. That's what he does.
This one, 1916.
Yeah. Rad.
So
right there at the end of time.
What do you think about this in World War I?
I think that that's pretty remarkable regardless. I think it's a pretty decent carbine in general. Short rifle. I keep saying carbine, but it is more
Musketoon.
short rifle-esque. Musketoon. It is more Musketoon-y, isn't it? And it is technically. The only thing I wish that I could do is just swap the bolt with the 95, just because I'm not kidding. I love that other bolt.
You don't like that roundedness?
It's just not as useful.
Technically, that's a 93 bolt, too, not even a 95, because the 95s had the rounded.
Liar. That's what you are.
Sorry.
Just a liar. He's been lying to me this whole
This
episode.
is a 93 turned
He's
into
like,
a
oh, this is a
95
95.
pattern. Look, I'm just trying to help dispel some of the Spanish weirdness. I think if we're talking about a World War I rifle, out of the 3 that we've shot and 4 that we've handled, obviously the 4th one's a little bit better than this, but it didn't exist by that time.
True.
This out of the 3, though, easily the one I would rather take into a battlefield.
Just between, I know you're not including the long rifle in your own last 2, but between this and the 95.
No, I'm concluding the long rifle because we talked, so the long rifle is just too dang long, right?
Yeah, it really is. Just
We're not
too much
gonna-
weight, too much length for what we know we're going to be trucking through.
We're not losing any reasonable accuracy with that.
It's true, you're not.
We're still shooting
This
just
is
as far
better
as
sight.
we need to. So that's good. So we don't want the mass of the long rifle. We like the carbine. It's a little shorter and handier, but it has no bayonet lug.
Nope, that's true. You've gained back your tool in this case.
And I also feel like that sight's going to take a beating for a little longer than this one.
That's true.
But my one hesitation is how loosely fit that sight is. So I'm going to assume that I had one that was in newer, better shape.
Yeah, it does wiggle a little bit.
No, you dial that halfway out and then wiggle it, and it's like easily 50-meter changes. I mean, it's... Look at that. Yeah.
Oh, you're not kidding. Yeah, this one's worn. I mean, there's no way they came just as is. You just got to guess at 50 more. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, there's a fitment issue there, but assuming factory, I would take that.
I can see that.
What do you think? Is that a strong contender for a good World War I rifle, or where would you put it?
I think it is a strong contender. The only thing is I don't think it's something that you could consider like in your top 10, I would say, just because of the sights itself. We do have improvements that happen later on.
You don't like the longer vizier.
I think it's an outdated sight style in general. I think there are better options, like what we've seen on Henry's rifle.
However, other than the rear sight, in one of your top 5 rifles that you listed in your top 10 of World War I was a Serbian that was a little shorter than this, which meant the follow-up shots were poorer.
Yep.
But you get your bayonet, you have no semi-pistol grip, and you're not using a ladder sight, which I don't know how much better a ladder sight would be than the longer vizier. I don't know. I feel like it's a very strong contender for one of the better options of that time period, especially with the gas relief
It's still
added.
strong. I just don't think it's in my personal top 10.
Oh, you're just not finding favoritism? I think after doing this episode, my appreciation for the 1916 has skyrocketed.
I think my appreciation for Spanish rifles in general, for the Spanish Mausers, has definitely appreciated from these episodes.
Yeah. Oh, no. They've gone up. But
Outstanding.
specifically this design, I actually consider it to be a very strong bolt-action rifle design. It's the few things that the 1893 didn't do as well as the 98. One of them was the gas relief. They put the relief cut on there to make up for some of that deficiency. And then otherwise, it's a very strong platform. Yeah. It's a light platform. It's a good cartridge. You can also find these in 7.62 NATO, like we talked about.
Ooh, rad.
Yeah, which means it's a very modern shooter in a lot of ways. I think, again, this is another point where we found a very underappreciated firearm in the market.
True.
So maybe we just ruined the value on them by saying that.
Hooray! We did it again.
Run! Grab them all
It's like the Vetterlies all over again.
The Vetterlies went from a value of $150 to $250 after we...
Dang, we broke the
really
bank
broke
on
that
that
market.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the foul that we've never done a video on is like 300 times its original price, so whatever. But if you see a Spanish Mauser, maybe give it a second look. They're pretty cool guys.
Yeah, they are pretty good.
All right, anything else?
Nah, pretty much it.
Okay, well, thank you guys for tuning in for this one. Updates after the credits, and we hope you have a good one.
Bye, everybody.